Hi, and welcome to Priority Zero, a lead dev engineering leadership podcast. My name is Scott Carey, and I am your host today. On this podcast, we talk about people's engineering leadership journeys and their biggest priority right now. And today, I'm joined by Rob Zuber. Rob, thanks so much for being on.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Rob has flown all the way from San Francisco. He's pretty jet lagged right now, but we're going to keep going.
We'll see how this works. It's going to be epic.
Rob, before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do right now?
Sure, yeah. Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI. Well, we'll talk about my journey, I think, in terms of what I do as a CTO, because it's changed. I've been at CircleCI coming up on 10 years later this summer. So it's been a very different job over the years, which is one of the things that I love about it. So I'll let us get into that, but at a high level, I'm responsible for a chunk of engineering, as well as doing things, in the market, help people understand what we do, and spend time thinking about strategy from a, product go-to-market perspective. We're a company that sells CI and CD. It's very much focused on developers. So engineering leaders like myself are the primary buyer, if you will. And so I'm in a great position to connect with those folks, understand their current challenges, what their P0s are right now, and see how we can help them. So I spend a lot of time, working directly with our customers like that.
Nice. Yeah, I really want to get into that. We don't talk to many people on this podcast who've been anywhere for 10 years, and I really am keen to see how that's kind of
I don't
changed.
think there are that many of those people, honestly.
Not in this industry.
The thing I've found myself saying about it is it's long enough to live with the consequences of your decisions. And I think we miss that a little bit in this industry, right? Like, we make a lot of, let's use this cool technology and we should change all of this. And then people leave and aren't around to see like what happened as a result.
Lots of sowing, not so much reaping.
Yeah, exactly. So, hopefully I at least do my best to share some of those lessons, although often we have to learn them for ourselves.
So before we do that, I want to hear a little bit more about your journey up to that point. So when did you become interested in software or software engineering?
Yeah, great question. So I studied engineering, but not software. I was in applied science, engineering physics with a subspecialty in material science, which is very specific. There were 3 graduates in my class with that specific combination.
Where'd you study?
Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario.
Okay, yeah.
And so I graduated and went into a manufacturing role, where my job was basically analyzing the manufacturing process, trying to fix quality, like identifying where there were quality issues, changing the process, changing the tooling. We were doing outsourced electronics manufacturing. So basically my customer was Cisco back then, and I was this was when Cisco was building the backbone of the internet. So we were doing like large scale circuit board assembly. Really high-end, really expensive, lots of optical sort of fiber networks, that kind of stuff. Anyway, I got really interested in the data side of it because it was very manual. We took all this data from one place, typed it into all these spreadsheets, and it felt like we were doing a lot of moving numbers around and not a lot of thinking. And so I became interested in I basically built a data pipeline. The tools weren't great in the late 90s. I was hand coding C++ sort of to move data around, which is like, there are better tools today, thank goodness.
Did we even call it a data pipeline?
Yeah, it was a mess. The whole thing was a mess. But the result was we could do more of the thinking and analysis because we had the data more readily, right? But after that, I found that I was more interested in sort of building the software than in solving the system or the manufacturing problems. And so about a year after I had joined there, some friends of mine started a startup in Toronto, which is where I grew up. And I went to join them. And it was like, really small group of people working out of a house, very just, we were working ridiculous hours like that. But the result was I was working with some really great people who were happy to sort of mentor and teach me about what we were doing. I brought my tenacity and curiosity to solve big system problems, but learned about software development and construction from those folks. And from there, it's been all software ever since.
Did you learn all the software kind of on the job, kind of self-taught?
Yeah, well, I mean, why are you doing that? Tell me more about this. Like, but yeah, I mean, we would go to the bookstore, and it's like, I don't even know if we could afford
I
books.
like
We
how
would
you
just
say that
sit.
like it's something that doesn't exist anymore. There was this thing called a bookstore.
Well, I mean, Google didn't exist, right? Like we used Alta Vista, and like you could search, but there was no content to find, right? No one had solved the problem. So
you needed the exact.
we would go down to the bookstore down the street from our little house that we were working out of and sit there. I don't even know if we bought the books in the end. We would just sit there with all of them on the floor, right? It was like big box kind of bookstore era, and try to find answers to our problems. I remember my first trip to San Francisco. So when I was living in Toronto, we went to Java One, which was like a big conference back in the day, and that was when we realized other people were solving the same problems. It was like we were living in this total little cocoon kind of. It was really bizarre. But so yeah, I learned almost everything there. I had done one class in Fortran because I was in physics.
Yeah.
And one in Pascal. And those were my two programming classes. They weren't particularly valuable or useful to me when I got out.
Yeah. And like even when you did those classes, did that not spark something then? It was really.
I thought it was interesting, but I thought everything I was doing was interesting. I just love learning new things. And so I was doing a little bit of that, but I was taking like a history class as an elective. I enjoyed quantum mechanics until like I realized I didn't understand any of it. And so it was all interesting, but I didn't know what the work was in any of those
you needed
things,
a problem
right?
to solve.
It was like, once I got into the working environment, what did I enjoy doing all day, every day, instead of what's just like new information that's fun to know about? And I think that's where I really started to see, I enjoy doing this. Plus, the factory setting was 10, 15,000 people. The company in the house was 10 people. And so that was way more my speed, right? So, and then it became the entrepreneurial thing. So I've started a bunch of companies since then. And really just enjoy like the pursuit of the problem and trying to find product market fit and all of these things that are not just sitting typing code, but what is the model of solving this problem, right? And I guess if I try to project that back into that first story, what was interesting to me was all these people around me are struggling to do a thing and it doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
How can I make that better for them, right? Because it wasn't just a tool for me, like 20 or 30 engineers after that just started using the thing that I built, so their job was better, right? And then, so I think it was kind of that spark more than I love typing code. Like, wow, managing memory is super fun. Like, I want to do more of that.
And I can see the connective tissue all the way through here to what CircleCI does now. But then, like, what are the steps I'm missing there? So did you kind of startup to startup? Have you always worked in that world?
Yeah, pretty much. So one of the first things I did at that startup after I joined was like write the build script. So clearly, like, there's the spark was there somewhere. I didn't think, what I'm going to do in the future is build a company to do this or whatever. But I've always enjoyed that piece of it. I did some systems work, some like kind of what you would call SRE probably now. And then, we were acquired in 2000. I moved to the Bay. Then 2001 happened. Everything was a disaster for a long time. I guess it was basically end of 2000. Like just after we arrived, things started to kind of fall apart. And then I was actually at that company for quite a while longer. So I mean, established, I'm Canadian. I was going through like the green card process, all this, so I wasn't quite as free to move around and do new things. So I was just keeping my head down, hoping to keep my job. And then I left there and took a job as a CTO, basically. Went from kind of just doing work. At some point I was in something called the office of the CTO at that company. And so was doing a little bit of strategy, a little bit of like sort of forward-looking product, a little technical direction type of, so like the pieces. And then became the CTO at a small startup. And that's actually probably when I did the most coding, ironically. Because we were a tiny company and it was like my job was to be the team lead of a very small group of engineers and just get stuff out the door. And so just was cranking all day, every day. It wasn't very strategic, wasn't very CTO, if I'm honest. It was just, what's the product we're building? How quickly can we get it done? Get things out in front of customers. And then I did some like things, a little weird stuff happened after that. I was like teaching for a friend who had a training company. which is probably the time that my software development skills improved the most. Because when you try to explain stuff to other people, you actually have to understand it instead of like, well, this worked on Stack Overflow, so it'll work for me. It was like, oh, how do I explain the core concepts here? So that was really helpful. I did some consulting for other folks just to try to help them out with problems. And then started another thing. I can't remember, maybe one or two things in there. And then met Jim Rose, who's the CEO of CircleCI, and he and I and one other person that he knows, or he knew, had started a different company with, started something, that was 2011, and we were building a marketplace, a consumer marketplace, and really trying to build off the Facebook platform. It was like, what's the intersection between social and marketplaces? And there's a bunch of stuff that came up around that time. Some of them are still doing really well today. Facebook sort of turned off the platform one morning. They decided to go into mobile, which was the right call. We suffered from that decision. And so we were trying to figure out what to do next. We started building a bunch of mobile apps. And then we started building mobile CI/CD because mobile apps were really hard to build. And we saw an opportunity in that space. And then we found that all of our customers in the very early days, they all said, we also have a back end. Right? How do we solve for that? And we said, we heard this CircleCI is pretty good. You should go check them out. And we're like, feels like there's an opportunity here. So we met the folks from Circle and joined in 2014.
Nice. And so I'm going to take one step back because I think that loads of people listening today will be like, okay, so you went from basically being a software developer to being the CTO. And I was in the office of the CTO, but that like jump for most people probably seems quite crazy. But obviously this is in the startup world. But I think the through line so far I'm getting from your career is like a certain amount of scrappiness. And I definitely want to talk about when you were kind of scaling CircleCI because there was definitely some scrappiness there.
Yeah.
But in terms of like picking up the software development skills, like we already talked about how you pick those up, but how did you pick up the other stuff that goes into being a CTO?
Yeah, so I was for a hot minute at that same company where there was an office of the CTO. I think actually we disbanded the office of the CTO as we were going, like it was a struggling company, and I ended up being a product manager, which I was complete garbage at. But I had to learn, product thinking and sort of like what is the customer, really thinking about the customer perspective of it. I think that was really helpful. I also spent, I can't even remember the order, the sequence, but I spent a bunch of years just on the road as like a high-level SE, flying to customer sites and talking, and we had huge telcos as our customers and stuff like that, and presenting the solution and figuring out how would we build this into your architecture and your systems. And so it wasn't, writing code all day, but thinking about how do we build a system that's flexible, that integrates nicely, like all those kind of bigger problems. And then somewhere post the first CTO role, I joined another startup to help them out and was acting as a head of business development. And so just have tried all these different things in a really bizarre, nonlinear way. But each of them I was willing to get, scrappy, I guess, like as a head of business development, I was working for a company that was building an e-reader. And luckily I had this weird piece of background, which was an understanding of outsourced electronics manufacturing. So I got on a plane and flew to Taiwan and literally like walked the streets saying, does anyone here make e-readers? Just the willingness to do that, I think is not super common, but I had one meeting set up and I went to the first meeting and this person said, oh, are you trying to meet other manufacturers? He took me to his competitors to meet them. And then he introduced me to more people so I could meet them. And so, we ended up basically finding a manufacturer, building the product, getting it to market, working with a design partner, like all this really interesting stuff. And it's honestly like just being willing to try it, And so each of those different facets, like I'm not going to run business development, I'm not going to run product, but I've done enough of those things to build the understanding and empathy for what those people need, to then be a good partner to them as a technical person at the table, which I think is like, if you come linearly, like I'm not gonna say you can't do it, but if you come just linearly through like, I'm a junior engineer, senior engineer, principal, now I'm CTO, right? Like our senior staff and principal, senior staffs, I don't know how to pluralize that. Anyway, those folks, like I involve them in those sorts of conversations, but they're not thrust into it, deep end the way that I was. And so it takes more time to develop a lot of those skills.
Yeah, it kind of supercharges your ability to understand like cross-functional like collaboration.
Right.
I feel like that's one of my favorite things about working at startups, is always that like I'm going to learn loads of stuff about things I had no idea about, and that is a superpower in some regards. And then there's like other elements where it can get a little bit too scrappy, and it can be a little bit like, okay, we need some help here. Like we need to bring in someone that can kind of show us how to do this. But you figure that stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people, and when I was doing a talk last week at a different conference, and I always open with like my biases. Right? Here's what you should know about me that will tell you why this is totally skewed to the way that I think. And be warned, like this might work for you, it might not work, right? But these are the things this is how I approach it. Like I'll always take the scrappy option, even when that's a terrible option. So, I need someone around me to say, whoa, easy there. Like that's actually not gonna work very well, right? That's gonna go horribly. And knowing that, I think just knowing that about yourself is really important.
And good founding teams tend to have those two sides. Like the constant optimist and the pessimist kind of like playing off.
Yes, I think kind of both the ones that survive, I think, probably have some balance of that, right? There's plenty of founding teams that are not particularly well structured, and the companies explode. One thing that's interesting, I think, also on that vein, like we'll talk about the growth, I think, here in a second, but I'm not a founder of CircleCI, I guess, to be clear. Well, we said we were acquired in, but I've been there for most of the life of the company at this point, right? The majority of it. But when you are a leader, like a CTO, right? Yeah, you start out as a glorified team lead. But when the company grows, right, in every other role, we talk about senior staff, principal, whatever, someone else is making a decision about when you're ready to take on the next level. But when you're the CEO or CTO, the world is deciding when the next level is coming, right? How fast you're growing, how much adoption you have, and how fast, and you can either succeed or basically be thrown out, right? There's not oh, Rob, I think as a CTO, you're not quite ready for us to be this scale, so what do you do? I mean, you're gonna lose the title, right? If you're gonna stay in the company, you're gonna lose the title. So you really have to be comfortable and push yourself, I think, to always be learning, always be ready, like take the feedback, whether it's coaching or just your peers or whatever, to understand like we are about to go operate at this level, and what you've been doing for the last 6 months is totally not what we need from you now. Yeah. And sort of, I think that again, that willingness to just jump in and try something has been helpful to me in that regard. Yeah, and I want to talk about that. So like when we're 10 years into CircleCI now, or you being at CircleCI, and obviously when you started, I mean, you were kind of driving up and down Sandhill Road, weren't you, trying to get investment, kind of coding in the back of the car, and I want to hear that story again because it's my favorite. But then obviously, you've gone through so many different iterations since then, and you've stayed throughout, and there's been certain moments probably through that whole journey where it's like, all right, am I the right CTO for this company or this company or this company? It's the same company, but it's different. Like, how did you kind of manage through those different iterations, and did you enjoy any of those parts more than the other? Yeah, I mean, I have done most things, I think. The coding in the back of the car was actually the previous company, but it's true. Okay. Like, fundraising, right? And when you're doing fundraising in a later stage company, like I might meet the investor somewhere late in the discussion. Hey, we want to meet the rest of the team, right? Because the assumption is the product is working. Right, at that higher scale, right? So now it's a financial modeling, what's the market sort of discussion. Whereas early fundraising is like, I want to meet the team because that's the only thing that I'm investing in these people in the hopes that they will figure something out, right? Whereas much later, it's like, this is an established business. What's the market doing? So that changes. That's one thing that changes. But there have been one of my favorite stories. I don't know why it's one of my favorite stories, but we had this moment where we had built the iOS part of CircleCI. And then this is a little later inside of CircleCI, but the virtualization layer that we were using, which was we'll call it scrappy, basically started collapsing. Like a VM would run one build and then crash. And the only way we could get it back was to reboot the machine. And so myself and a member of our SRE team, for approximately 2 weeks, traded off rebooting machines. That's what we did. While the people building the next iteration were working through it, trying to get everything online, like on a complete rewrite of our virtualization. But we could not run builds without rebooting machines, again, 24/7. We were writing bash scripts to call Slack, to call Hubot, to reboot machines, sort of like And we were just
But you were still just rebooting machines.
like bleary-eyed, right? Just like pumping coffee and then, hey, I'm gonna go pass out for 2 hours. Can you keep this going? Like absolutely atrocious, but that's what you have to do at some point. And I'm like, I'm the least qualified person to fix this problem, but I'm super qualified to drink lots of coffee and press reboot, right? And so like, that's probably at one end of the spectrum. And then, yeah, like strategy work, sort of where are we going as an organization? You know, something like generative AI shows up, and there's a very important question for us of what does software delivery look like in 5 years? Not how do I cram a feature into the product right now so I can put those little sparkle emojis on it, but all of software development is about to change, and we are a software development tool provider. What does that mean for us as an organization? Like, what do we need to be doing to be relevant and useful to our customers over the course of the next 5 to 10 years? Is a lot different from like reboot.
But like, and also
reboot.
like, how much time do you have to figure that out?
Right.
And you have no idea.
Yeah.
It's like you said earlier, like you have no idea what kind of time you're playing with to figure that generative AI question out.
Yeah.
And so like, how do you navigate that as a CTO when you're like, I need to, like this could be existential, so I need to figure this out, but I have no idea by when.
Yeah, it's not the by when piece of figuring it out that I worry about. It's, can we orient ourselves in a way to execute on that? Can we, like, we're gonna make a bet now, it's gonna be wrong, because like November 2022, whatever, this is what we think about the world. By March, we thought something totally different. And then by the next November, we thought something totally different, right? So it's, can we organize ourselves in a way that we will both start acting, but also be paying close attention? I think the like, what do we think now actually doesn't take very long. I will say over the years, like through friends, coaches, whatever, people that I've worked with, I've picked up reading, I read a lot, like picked up a lot of tools to like think about strategy, which have been really helpful. And I know who to call in my like inside the organization to say, hey, we got to sit down and figure this out. I want some people who know bits of this. Like I don't need to know everything about AI. I need to know who's got thoughts. And then we'll sit down and map out like, how do we think the market's going to move? What would be our role in that? Like, how do we be effective? I think one of the earlier decisions, just to give concrete examples that we made was, we could go try to provide tools to, data science teams, because they're suddenly in the limelight. But we're speaking a language that they don't even understand, right? But what's about to happen is software developers, our people, are going to start integrating generative AI into their products. They're going to have to continue to deliver those products, but they don't know how to think about testing these things. Can we solve that problem for them, right? And bridge them into this new world? And that was a matter of sitting down and looking at the whole puzzle, like who do we talk to, what language do we speak, what do we bring to the table, what's happening in the market? But it was a 30-minute conversation, right? Once you bring all that stuff, again, you have the right people and the right tools to think about it, then you can have that conversation pretty quickly. But the conversation ends with, great, we have to go do a bunch of experimentation and try to figure out what this market is and see, and then let's go do some podcasts on the topic and let's go do some presentations, talk to people out in the market, see if it resonates. Luckily, I think a week later, Sequoia put out a giant paper or whatever, post saying, this is what's about to happen. And we're like, oh, look,
there we go.
We think what they think. Yeah. And now we can hold this up as like, it's not just us telling you that, but this is what the market is thinking. But so, it's like weird to say that's 30 minutes of work. You need also the like processing time, and you need to go do a bunch of reading and all that kind of stuff. But you can, you also can't sit around all day and strategize, right? It doesn't take that long to say, cool, we have a plan. Yep. Okay, let's go execute against the plan. And so the role does shift, execution strategies.
Did you find the point in your career where you became more comfortable making those decisions? Because I find, at my point in my career, I find it really difficult to know when to stop doing the analysis and switch to the execution piece. But it sounds like you've kind of found a bit of I
don't want to sound overconfident on that. I think the thing that I've come to realize is that not acting is an implicit decision that you're making. And so I spend a lot of time talking to people about opportunity cost, right? And being comfortable with the notion that if we have a general sense of what we believe, we can now make some forward progress in service of learning more, right? Versus this is us committing all of our resources and all of our energy on a 10-year plan. It's like, well, we feel a little bit uncomfortable. Great, let's do something to get moving that will teach us something else, right? Like, let's write the blog post. Let's go find some, we went and found a bunch of companies in the space and said, what do you think? What do you think is going to happen? Can we co-create some content and see how people respond to it? Like, we put a course out on deep learning that was like massively popular, and we said, oh, great. There's something here, right? People are interested to understand this. This is a real problem. We've hit a nerve. How can we build on top of that? Like, building product is one of the most expensive options that you have to learn additional information, but that doesn't mean that you should sit around and like make more spreadsheets, draw more pictures, right? Great, what's the thing that we could do that would teach us something? User research, again, like create content, put it out there, use social networks, whatever it is, whatever tools you have where you can get some feedback, is a great way to feel like you're making like just forward motion. And now you can course correct.
And can we course correct? And is this an irreversible decision? You never want to make those irreversible decisions. Yeah.
We're not telling everyone to just like stop what they're doing, throw out all that software and go do something else, right? We're just saying, oh, we think there might be something here.
We're not changing our name to...
Yeah. Yes, please never.
So we've talked about how you kind of learned to be a software developer. We've talked about how you kind of learned to be a CTO, and a lot of kind of working out other pieces of the business, working out strategy, working out what's going on in your industry. But we haven't really talked about how you run an engineering organization. Like, how did you figure that part of the job out? Because I see those as kind of, I might be wrong, but I see those as like the 3 pillars of the role.
Yeah. That's a great question. Maybe I haven't. So a couple things I will say. I grew the engineering organization to a point, and then actually only a couple years ago hired an SVP of engineering to run engineering and report to the CEO so I could go strategize and podcast.
I've seen that done before.
We've now undone that a little bit, mostly because we've been through a tough couple of years like everybody. And so I'm more involved in engineering because I'm trying to solve a specific problem, which we'll come back to in the P0, I guess. Like reading, I'm going to say reading about everything. I'm a big fan of books. I think one of the things that I always say about books is I'm happy to take it or leave it. Like, I don't say this book is great and everything in the book is great. I think people get hung up on like, I didn't like this part, so I don't recommend it. Like, there's always new ideas, but I need to take those, put them in my toolkit and apply them to my context. So I also have to be comfortable with my understanding of the context, right?
You're an audiobook guy, right?
What's that? Yeah, a lot of audiobooks definitely upped my game in terms of, because I do a lot of driving. And so that produced a lot of time for me to consume.
Have kids that play sports, so you spend a lot of time in the car.
Yeah, exactly, including skiing as a sport, which in California means, 6 to 15 hours on a weekend kind of in the car. But even, going for a walk with my dog, why not? I'll just, get a little bit done. So I find that to be a really good resource. And then I've had a couple of great coaches over the years. One sort of standalone, one we did a executive team coaching thing, but got some individual coaching along the way. And I don't know that those unlocked a lot for me from a leadership perspective, from a like running the organization perspective. It wasn't like, here's how I would structure my, like that sort of thing, but rather, unlocking me, like what are the things that I bring to the table and how do I orient myself around those strengths? Like, I think that's a big thing. And so I would say, like, I would lean into that. I've often asked myself the question sort of through all these transitions, what am I uniquely qualified to do and how can I add the most value to this business at this point? And I think, speaking to my just ridiculous career journey, because it's mostly been starting companies, leading companies, that question is easier to ask for me than many people. I've never felt like, what's the thing I need to do to get the next promotion? I always joke that I've had the same title for 17 years at this point. Like, that's not the thing I'm focusing on.
It's not a joke, because it's true.
Yeah, well, it's true. Yeah, exactly. But like, when I talk, like people, that's often what they're oriented around, right? Yeah. What's the thing that I need to do to progress my career? Whereas my question is usually, what's the thing I need to do to make this company successful?
Yeah.
Right? And that's what I want everyone's question to be, but I respect that that's not what everyone's question is, right? And so because I'm in that situation, I feel a lot more comfortable just saying, and Jim, our CEO, like he and I have been working together for longer than we've been at CircleCI, so we have a very comfortable relationship. I feel very confident saying, what I think what we need to do right now is X, and the role that I should probably play in that is this, right? What do you think?
Yep.
I'm happy to do something else, right? We all know that, like we'll have that conversation very openly, but that puts me in a position to, openly learn, take lots of feedback. Like again, because of that comfort of I just want the company to be successful. I want the people in the company to feel successful and be a part of that. I don't hang a lot on, again, my am I developing on my own career path? And so I think that just makes it easier to, to be open, to accept the feedback and to say, great, how can I take that and work with it and make the company more successful? And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that process has allowed me to learn at least, right? For some, and I think, because people have said it to me, so I assume they've been comfortable, for people to say, I think you're making a mess of this, right? I totally wouldn't have done it that way. And sometimes look, here's the additional context that I have. And they say, oh, I guess if I look at it through that lens, that makes sense. Or I'll say, here's the additional context I have. And they'll say, yeah, it still doesn't make any sense. I'm like, great, what should we do differently, right? How can we approach this?
Great. And Rob, this is the Priority Zero podcast. So I'm really curious, what's that Priority Zero for you? What's that big thing at the top of your list right now?
Yeah, so at the moment, the thing that I am most focused on is, I'll call it developer experience within CircleCI. Not what we provide to our customers, which is important to me, but the ability of our developers to get past the toil, kind of get through the complexity and get things done, right? Deliver value to our customers. Talked about sort of growing and shrinking and owning, engineering. So I have responsibility at the moment for effectively a platform team. It's like platform plus shared services, which is a decent sized portion of our engineering organization. And the reason that I'm doing that is to create the freedom for us within that organization to really clear blockers. We've been around for a long time. We're smaller than we were a couple years ago. And what I've found in that process, and I've spoken to a bunch of engineering leaders about it just to kind of test what they're seeing, is, when you expand, you're ahead of the curve, right? You're trying to put in place process, hire people who will operate at an even larger scale than you're currently at, and then you slow down or even retract, and you have these overcomplicated processes and people who focus on process, right? That's kind of what you've hired them for. And you're trying to get scrappy again, right? How do we kind of clear blockers and get things done? And what happens in that, or what has happened at least in our org a little bit, is it becomes hard to know even how you would clear the blocker, right? I've had people come to me and say, hey, we want to get this thing done, but there's this compliance reason that it's, we can't do it that way or whatever. And there's this policy that says we can't do it that way. And I'm like, well, great news. My name's on the bottom of that policy, so I can rewrite it, right? I mean, I signed it basically because someone else designed it. And I said, sure, whatever, that sounds great. I got other things to do. And now that's getting in our way. But great, if I'm involved, then we have the freedom and the flexibility to say, it doesn't matter who owns it. I can go find that person. We can come up with a new plan, and then we'll just execute against the new plan.
But it is easier to create policy than get rid of policy.
It is. But it takes just high-level buy-in, right? It's so much easier, and I don't want it to be that way, really, but it is so much easier to show up and say, look, I totally understand the risk and the trade-off for the company, right? I understand that we do this for security reasons. And I'm not trying to make this insecure. I'm telling you how we can solve that problem differently in a way that allows us to deliver more effectively. And I think, as you get bigger, people get more specialized and they maybe have less of a big picture view. And so they're trying to solve a problem that they've been told this is really important, right? It's total credit to them. They found a solution to that problem. But now when you look across the whole business, you say, oh, that solution is actually impacting us and creating risk over here. And as someone who's at a high enough level and with a high enough viewpoint, I can say, I'm comfortable with us doing this differently because I'm uncomfortable with this risk over here, right? And so getting us back to a spot where we really feel like, people know how things work, how to get them done, simplify just across the board, simplifying systems. So it's a little bit roadblock. It's a little bit system design. It's a little bit, standardization and reducing footprint, like a lot of different things. And the process of working on it is helping those individual developers who are trying to get stuff done, but also helping grow leaders in the organization, right? Like resetting, hey, this is the vision. This is how we're trying to do it, right? Can you help me go do that? Because I'm doing that and doing this, like where this is, being in London at a conference or whatever. And so it's important to me to quickly turn that from I'm involved in a million different things to here are some people that with a little bit of an extra perspective and context could step up and now do this thing the way that we want it done.
Yeah, those corrections kind of flatten things out a little bit. And if you give them the ability to kind of move things, then they're going to find a quicker way to do it.
Right.
I think I'm interested, like, how are your engineers responding to that? Like, are they embracing it, seeing it as like a great thing, or are they freaked out?
The part they tell me is probably more the former. Well, so it probably depends, right? I did something similar a couple of years ago when we were specifically having reliability issues. And I'll talk about it for a second just because I have more data on the backside, right? Talking about living with the consequences of your decisions. And people that had enough trust in me to speak to me directly said, I felt very uncomfortable when, I started showing up in every incident, right? Because I was like, we're not responding quickly enough. We don't, what is it? We don't understand the system. We have problems that are too hard to solve. I don't know, but I can't help unless I can watch, right? And get good information. I wasn't getting good information about what the problem was.
Something was missing.
Yeah, and so people were like, I feel like maybe now I'm in trouble in an incident because my CTO is showing up in the incident. I was like, well, my perspective is I'm not gonna ask anyone to do anything I wouldn't do, right? So I'll put myself on call 24/7 and just show up in all the incidents. I'm not solving them, but I can say, oh, we could communicate better to customers right here. Let me help you with that. Or it seems like you're really rabbit holed on this issue, but are you totally sure that's the right thing? Can we step back out and as an outside observer, bring some fresh perspective? And so I got a little bit of that comment, but also a little bit of, it's really nice to see how invested you are, right? That you would show up and grind, incidents are not fun for most people, right? So I'll show up and grind through it with you, right? And I'll celebrate the win at the end of it, sort of thing. And I think it remains some mix of that, right? And I was speaking about this last week. I made a little grid of advantages and disadvantages of getting really involved, right? The advantages are your decisions get made really quickly. You clear a bunch of blockers. There's a lot, and you have the potential to identify people and really grow them up like hidden talent in the organization. Disadvantages, you're like an agent of chaos, right? Seeing the side effects of your actions is really hard. And so know that, go in knowing that, either accept the risk, which I have. It's not really an either or, but accept the risk and try to make sure you have good feedback loops, right? Call out to people, hey, keep an eye on this, right? If everyone behind you is saying, or when I'm not in the room is saying, what a nightmare, this is so much harder, I want to know because I'm trying to help everyone get out of a rut,
yeah,
right? Make things easier.
Yeah, you never want to be involved in that process. So it depends on how you show up, right? It depends on what you bring to that, and being open with people, transparent. If you just dropped in there and you're like the Eye of Sauron, it's going to freak everyone out.
Right.
If you come in there and say I just want to figure this thing out, I'm just here to observe, I'm here to help, I think you can overcome that roadblock. It's never going to be an ideal situation.
Well, I think the other thing, when you ask for feedback, and when we made this change, I basically said, look, I can't guarantee that anything is going to get fixed because I don't even know right now, but I want your honest information, right? So the best I can offer is that I'm going to put in the work. And I got a ton of direct feedback. Not hey, this is stupid, but this is broken, and this is broken, and this is really hard, and here's some examples. And it was all overwhelming a little bit at first. I was like, oh, yep, no, there's a real problem. I'm glad to see that. But if you don't then act and share back information, which is a constant struggle because we're all really busy, then you get oh yeah, we signed up for that and we shared everything and we got nothing. So why would I bother, right? So I think the other thing is to continue to engage. This is the feedback that we're getting from y'all. These are the things that we're working on. And really, if you don't invest in that, then it's gonna fade quickly and you won't get the impact.
And I think going back to your priority zero of developer experience, kind of making that process more smooth, I think that one thing is before the correction, if that's what we're going to call it, over the last couple of years, I feel like people were maybe thinking about this wrong. They were thinking about developer experience and platform engineering as this big project that needed to happen. We're going to make this utopian developer experience for the whole company. And when you talk about developer experience and platform engineering, you are talking about it in a very different way. You're talking about kind of finding areas for improvement and removing blockers and kind of like speeding that stuff along. Is that right? Is that how you're thinking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I said, I think sometime last year and talked to some other folks about and got the same response was that platform has been a good start, but now it needs product thinking, right? And product designers don't, the good ones, the good product managers are not saying, here's the big utopian future and we're not going to ship it until we build that, right? This is how we talk to all of our customers. Like, what's the smallest increment of value that we can add? And can we get feedback on that and improve it or move on to the next thing, right? And so I experienced a lot of platform teams, because platform teams are often our customer as well, right? We've built this great thing, and as soon as our engineers actually start using it, right, their lives will be better. And my question is always, like, why are they, if they're not adopting your platform, have you solved their problem, right? Because when you think about product market fit, right, as a startup, as an entrepreneur, like we always describe it as you know it when you have it. The product is flying off the shelves. You literally can't keep up, right? All of your concerns are now just, can we even find the time to ship the next thing in between incidents as our platform is collapsing because we didn't design it for the scale that it's now operating at? Like, that's what product market fit looks like. And as a platform team, you're striving for product market fit, right? Like we talk about paved roads, right? Is everyone in the organization saying, why would I ever do anything myself when I could get this stuff that the platform team has built? And when your conversation is, we built all this great stuff, we just can't figure out how to get people to use it. I mean, if you were the head of product in an organization and you were saying, we built this amazing thing, we just can't figure out why no one's using it, you wouldn't be in a job very long, right? And so I think we need to really reorient how we think about platform teams to, like, I can make your life incrementally better by the end of the day. I'm going to go do that thing, right? Not big, like we're almost operating like waterfall. For platform teams.
Yeah, I think the damage that Steve Jobs quote did, where he talks about the customer not knowing what they want, can be like really quantified. Like, certain people think, oh no, I know better than the customer, so I'm going to build this thing, and then they will come. And sometimes if you are a genius, then you're going to pull that off. But most of the time, it's not a great way to.
And I would state that in platform, it's very rare that you're inventing a new category. Right? Like those Steve Jobs moments, which we all love to talk about, but there are very few, not just for Steve, but for the whole world, where you've redefined an entire category, right? I mean, you're basically just trying to build Heroku for your development team.
Because everyone loved Heroku.
Right, exactly. Everyone misses it.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's not the same. And the way that most products get constructed is through incremental, iterative discovery and driving forward one small improvement at a time. And your developers, every single tiny improvement that you make is like bottom line value to the company, right? So, and I think teams also struggle to express that, right? I mean, this is another place where being a senior leader and driving this is helpful, because I know that I have the buy-in of everyone on the executive team to focus on that work, right? Versus, why aren't those people shipping features? Right? It's features that pay for the company. Well, the people trying to ship the features are struggling, so we're going to use this energy to help them be more successful. Like, that ultimately pays off for us. And yes, it's going to take a little bit of time, but every single thing we do is going to make it faster and faster and easier for us to do our job really well. So probably that part gets, as a percentage of the organization, gets smaller because we've solved some big problems. But for now, there's plenty of low-hanging fruit.
And it feels like a priority zero that could be your priority zero forever. Like, how do you make sure that there's an end point here?
Yeah, exactly. And I've been thinking about this in terms of exit criteria. I haven't written them yet. I haven't figured out what they are.
But I like that.
But it's not time-based, right? I'm going to show up for 6 months and then disappear and everything's going to go back to the way it was, sort of thing, right? Like, a sponge just taking its shape again, right? Like, we talked about leadership, right? So how do I grow people or establish an organization that will then run itself again. And probably there's some big problems we'll identify and say, okay, when these are done, it'll feel like things are more stable. But more, it's like the self-sustaining organization. Like, does it feel like everyone here wakes up every morning and says, what's the thing we could fix by the end of today to make everyone's life better? Great, then I can stop asking that question, right? I love this thing from, it's from a video based on Turn That Ship Around, so I don't know if it actually happens in the book. I've never read the book, whatever. I wish there were more 10-minute videos. I get through a lot more books. But anyway, where he talks about going from asking people what should we do, right, to draw out the thinking, to eventually just saying, what am I thinking right now? What's the next question that I'm going to ask you? Well, you're going to ask me this. Great. If you already know, we don't need to have this conversation anymore. Like, you're now in the position where you understand how to think about the problem and can drive it. And so that feels like the shape of the exit.
Great. We are at time, but I like to end every show on a recommendation. So is there something you've read, seen, listened to that you want to recommend?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I still didn't prepare. I will say, so it's called Greatness.
I saw this great 10-minute video.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's called Greatness by David Marquet. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but the guy that wrote Turn That Ship Around. I rewatch it probably once a quarter.
Okay, great.
Just to try to reinstill some of the values. It's a great little explainer. I should probably read the book just to figure out if I've been recommending the useful substitute for the book. But I think it's a great way to think about leadership. And about building more leaders in your organization.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Rob, and hope to see you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again for listening to Priority Zero, a lead dev podcast. Remember, you can get us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, but when you do, please remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and we hope to see you at the next one.